Peace and all good, and a Merry Christmas from Franciscan Media. I'm Father Jim Sabak, and this again is the Inbreaking of the Word. So we have celebrated Christmas. We've celebrated now 4 days of Christmas. Again, this week that happens in between, or whichever 7 days that happen between Christmas Day and New Year's Day, or Mary the Mother of God, is Christmas week. So it's again distorted and disjointed because it doesn't follow the same kind of week pattern that the rest of our weeks do. But again, as Advent has set us up already to expect the unexpected and to be moved out of the regular norm of things and to have everything upended in our lives, especially because God has broken into our world in a dynamic way by becoming one like us. So too this Christmas week doesn't follow the same kind of pattern of what a week is in our natural assessments of time and things like that. So the Sunday that always follows Christmas is given over to the Holy Family. So Holy Family Sunday, it would have been the first Sunday after Christmas before reforms in the calendar in the 1920s when this feast comes into existence. And then reforms of the calendar in the 1960s, and then the final reform of the calendar after the Second Vatican Council in the late 1960s, 1970, 1969, 1970. So Holy Family Sunday, what are you supposed to do with it? So the thing about, there's always been devotion to the Holy Family. So you got to remember that too. So this was not kind of a new invention when it comes into existence on the calendar. Devotion to the Holy Family perhaps goes back. There's always been, but not for as long a time as we might think. Devotion to the Holy Family kind of goes back to the 13th century, the 14th century. So it kind of gets into its norm there. Again, in those tumultuous times, the 13th and the 14th century, you got plagues, you got all kinds of wars and aggression amongst people. You have the kind of the end of feudalism, the beginning of the middle class. You have Franciscans coming around. People are looking for stability. So devotion to the family, devotion to understanding truly what family is, rather than kind of a community of big people and small people, both of which you could use to your advantage. There now begins to be growing this sense of connectedness and the sense of relationship and the sense of love, maybe even amongst families, that the family unit that might not have existed before that. In the ancient world, there might have been some better understandings of family. Again, as everything begins to fall apart after the fall of Rome and everything else that happens, kind of the family life becomes more functional and useful than it does as a place of support and love and care for each other. So devotion was always there. Benedict XV in the 1920s, however, begins to see this idea of the Holy Family as something that could even bring together what seems to have been lost in an equally tumultuous time as was the 13th and 14th centuries. So in the 1920s, you have the First World War, you have the fall of monarchies, which were favorable more or less to the church. The church was favorable to that model because the church is a monarchy. I mean, what else are you going to say about it? It's got a pope who lives for life. It's a one single ruler. It's a monarchy. And so the fall of the monarchies and the rise of republics, which may have not always been favorable to the church because the church was not always favorable to lower income people and lower classes and the peasantries because it kind of favored the nobles and the nobility because of assimilation and a likeness between the royal courts and the papal court. You begin to get republics that are not favorable to the papacy. You also then get the rise of socialism and communism, which again professes atheism and whatever it is that's also deferential. That's difficult for the church to hold on to and things like that. So looking as to what's going to bring together this world that seems to be getting confusion and chaos and maybe even falling apart. Well, Benedict XV basically says, well, let's look at the family, again, as this most central and core unit of faith, the central and core unit of what it means to be a people of faith, where faith first begins, where faith begins to grow. And so, again, this celebration of the Holy Family as a model for all families. And this feast gets to be placed upon the calendar. Now, Benedict didn't want to disrupt the normal course of Sundays and days that followed Christmas. And so this Holy Family Sunday was supposed to be celebrated after Epiphany. So between the 7th and the 13th, when the baptism of Jesus could be celebrated at its latest, the 13th and 14th of January, you'd have Holy Family Sunday within that time period. It changes in the calendar as we get to the reforms of Vatican II, and Holy Family Sunday becomes a Sunday that follows, per Christmas Day. And this is where kind of it's been kept to where it continues. What is this day about? So again, you get different kinds of readings, that happen. We get a reading from the book of Samuel about Samuel's birth, and again about Hannah basically saying that to Eli the priest, you thought that I was drunk when I was praying for this child because I was praying just using my mouth and not speaking words and asking God in my age and condition that he would give me a son, and God did, and here's the son. So kind of showing Eli, stop thinking, stop trying to formulate conclusions or to presume something when it isn't. And very good for Hannah to do that to Eli. And so Samuel then is offered back to the temple, back to God, as this gift offering that Hannah has in thanksgiving for the birth of her son. So it's again, Hannah has a kid, and the kid Samuel is given then back to God, and then Samuel becomes raised within the temple by Eli, and it will be God who speaks to Samuel, soon enough to basically say, "I need you to do my will in setting up a kingship, within Israel, because Israel is asking for that." The second reading from Hebrews basically speaks about, again, our unitedness to God, our unitedness to the family of God, our connection to God's family because of what Jesus has done in death and resurrection. Again, so looking forward to what it is that awaits this child who is born. The birth is just a beginning. The birth is not an end-all in itself, which is something we always have to remember. Again, we celebrate Christmas as such an entirety in and of itself that immediately it gets lost, and it can't, because it has to lead to death and resurrection that reunites humanity to God and God to humanity in a way that we could never do on our own. And not that there was ever anything that was dividing. Us between God and ourselves, we had to remember that we are always connected with God. And the letter to the Hebrews expresses that. And then you have the gospel, the most wonderful of all these gospels that can happen at this time of the year, where Jesus gets lost. Again, so the perfection of Mary in her immaculateness, or whatever perfection that Joseph had, they couldn't keep track of Jesus. And for whatever reason, they go to Jerusalem on some kind of visitation. They're moving back they're traveling back to Nazareth, and they recognize after a day that Jesus does not seem to be with them. And as they look through the caravan that's going back to Galilee and Nazareth, he's nowhere to be found. And so what do? Well, Mary and Joseph, go immediately back to Jerusalem to see if they can find him. Well, 3 days it takes them to locate him in the temple, where precocious little Jesus is basically sitting among these scholars and scribes and all of these theologians, within the temple, asking questions and learning things and spouting his own wisdom or whatever it is, because he is the Son of God. And again, and Mary says, "Why have you done this? You worried us." And Jesus basically saying, "Well, of course, I'd be at my Father's work. You should be knowing that." Well, if I ever said that, I'd be slapped across the face. And it's surprising that Mary doesn't do that to Jesus. But there are so many holes within the story in and of itself. First off, Jesus has been on his own maybe for 5 days. Who's taking care of him? Who's feeding him? Where is he sleeping? Again, the temple really wasn't a place that has residences. So what's going on? Who's taking care of this kid? Is he in a bubble, of sanctity that he doesn't need to rest or to eat or whatever it is with these scribes and Pharisees and scholars of the law, whatever it is? So that also is an issue. The thing about it, though, is that sometimes this feast is held up as a feast of comparison. Look at this wonderful Holy Family and look at how terribly shabby yours is. That is not what this feast is about. That is not what this gets to. Because obviously holiness does not mean perfection. Because if it did, then Jesus would be with Mary and Joseph all the time. And Mary and Joseph, at least Mary, would not have found him lost and not have forgotten about him or not have realized he was lost for quite some time. Holiness does not mean perfection. It means trust. It means love. It means care. And the more that you try to trust and love and care for each other in whatever family you happen to be at, by blood, by friendship, by relation, by whatever it is, the more that is built, the more holiness exists, the more holiness breaks through, the more holiness is witnessed. It is about those kinds of things that we often overlook, which are in our grasp, which are part of our being, which are part of what we are as human beings, to show love, to show trust, to show care, to show a nurturing for each other. Makes every family holy, makes every relationship holy. It makes us, again, signs and a wonder of God's inbreaking into this world. Continue blessed Christmas from Franciscan Media. May the Lord give you his peace.